On January 12, 2010, a cataclysmic event unfolded in Haiti, changing the nation's landscape and impacting millions of lives. At precisely 4:53 p.m. local time, a powerful earthquake struck the Caribbean nation, registering a magnitude of 7.0. This seismic event was centered near Léogâne, approximately 25 kilometers, 16 miles, west of Port-au-Prince, Haiti's bustling capital city. The earthquake was not only a sudden and violent jolt, but also a disaster of unprecedented scale that brought widespread destruction and suffering. Haiti, located on the island of Hispaniola, shares its territory with the Dominican Republic. The island has a history of seismic activity due to its position on the boundary between the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates. The geological setting makes it particularly susceptible to earthquakes. This vulnerability had been evident in the past, with significant tremors recorded in 1751 and 1770 that affected the region. However, the 2010 earthquake was unparalleled in its severity and impact. The Enriquillo Plantain Garden fault system, which runs through the region, was the source of the earthquake. This fault system is a complex network where the Caribbean and North American plates converge. For decades, stress had been accumulating along this fault line without major releases. On that fateful day, the accumulated stress was released in a sudden rupture, producing a massive earthquake that would prove catastrophic. Port-au-Prince, the capital city, is a densely populated urban area with a high concentration of buildings and infrastructure. The city, already struggling with poverty and limited resources, bore the brunt of the earthquake's impact. Many of its buildings were constructed with inadequate materials and techniques, exacerbating the damage. The shaking caused by the earthquake resulted in the collapse of countless structures, including residential buildings, commercial properties, and government offices. The immediate aftermath of the quake was chaotic. The ground shook violently, with the initial tremor lasting just under 30 seconds. Despite the short duration, the effects were devastating. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and the landscape of Port-au-Prince was forever altered. The earthquake's force was so intense that it caused severe damage to the infrastructure and disrupted essential services such as electricity, water supply, and telecommunications. In the hours following the quake, the scale of the destruction became increasingly evident. The Haitian government, already operating under strained conditions, struggled to respond to the disaster. The lack of preparedness for such a large-scale event left the nation struggling to manage the immediate and overwhelming needs of its people. International aid organizations and foreign governments quickly mobilized to provide assistance. However, the delivery of aid faced significant obstacles. The earthquake had damaged roads and bridges, making transportation of relief supplies difficult. The port of Port-au-Prince, a critical point for receiving international aid, was also affected, compounding the challenges faced by relief efforts. The human toll of the earthquake was staggering. Estimates suggest that over 250,000 people lost their lives, and more than 300,000 were injured. The quake left approximately 1.5 million people homeless, many of whom were forced to seek shelter in makeshift camps. The destruction of homes, schools, and hospitals left survivors without basic necessities and essential services. The immediate response to the disaster highlighted the severe limitations of Haiti's emergency management infrastructure. The country's weak building codes and inadequate urban planning contributed to the extent of the damage. The earthquake exposed the vulnerability of Haiti's infrastructure and underscored the need for improved disaster preparedness and response mechanisms. In summary, the 2010 Haiti earthquake was a defining moment in the nation's history. The initial tremor and its aftermath revealed the profound challenges faced by Haiti, from the immediate destruction to the long-term recovery efforts. The earthquake's impact was felt not only in the physical devastation, but also in the human suffering and the immense task of rebuilding a nation. The catastrophic 2010 Haiti earthquake resulted from a complex interaction of geological forces, primarily involving the movement of tectonic plates. To understand the formation of this devastating earthquake, it's essential to delve into the geological background of the region and the immediate sequence of events on January 12, 2010. Haiti is situated on the island of Hispaniola, which is located at the boundary between the Caribbean plate and the North American plate. This tectonic boundary is characterized by a series of faults, including the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault System. The Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault is a strike-slip fault, meaning that the plates slide past each other horizontally. This fault system has been the source of significant seismic activity in the region, with stress accumulating over time due to the slow, relentless movement of the tectonic plates. For decades prior to the earthquake, the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault System had been experiencing increased stress due to the ongoing tectonic forces. Despite the accumulation of strain, there had been no significant earthquake release along this fault, leading to a buildup of potential energy. This stress accumulation is what ultimately triggered the catastrophic event on January 12, 2010. On that fateful day at precisely 4:53 p.m. local time, the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault System experienced a sudden rupture. The earthquake struck with a magnitude of 7.0, a powerful force capable of causing widespread destruction. The epicenter of the quake was located near Léogâne, approximately 25 kilometers, 16 miles, west of Port-au-Prince, the capital city of Haiti. The earthquake's rupture occurred along a section of the fault where stress had accumulated over many years. The release of this stress produced a violent shaking of the ground, felt intensely throughout the region. The seismic waves radiated outward from the epicenter, causing significant ground movement and structural damage. In the moments immediately following the quake, the intensity of the shaking was overwhelming. The tremor lasted just under 30 seconds, but during this brief period, the impact was profound. The ground shook violently and many buildings and structures, already vulnerable due to inadequate construction standards, collapsed under the force of the quake. The immediate effects of the earthquake were catastrophic. In Port-au-Prince, the capital city, the tremor caused widespread destruction. Buildings that had stood for years, including homes, commercial properties, and government offices, were reduced to rubble. Streets and infrastructure were severely damaged, with roads buckling and bridges collapsing. The impact on the population was devastating. Many people were caught off guard, and the collapse of buildings resulted in a significant number of casualties. In the first few hours following the earthquake, the full extent of the damage began to emerge. The scenes were chaotic and harrowing. Streets filled with debris, injured people seeking help, and survivors trying to rescue those trapped under the rubble. The earthquake's force also caused landslides and structural failures in areas surrounding Port-au-Prince, amplifying the overall impact. The tremor disrupted essential services such as electricity, water supply, and telecommunications, compounding the challenges faced by the survivors and emergency responders. In the immediate aftermath of the quake, the Haitian government faced enormous challenges in coordinating a response. The destruction of key government buildings and the disruption of communication networks hindered the ability to assess the situation and mobilize resources effectively. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed the nation's emergency management infrastructure, which was already operating under significant strain. International aid organizations and foreign governments quickly began to mobilize relief efforts. However, the delivery of aid faced considerable obstacles. The destruction of roads and infrastructure made it difficult to transport relief supplies to affected areas. The port of Port-au-Prince, a crucial point for receiving international aid, was also impacted, further complicating the distribution of assistance. The first day of the earthquake was marked by confusion, desperation, and the urgent need for coordinated rescue and relief efforts. As the extent of the destruction became clearer, it was evident that the road to recovery would be long and challenging. The initial response highlighted both the immediate needs of the survivors and the logistical hurdles faced by those attempting to provide assistance. In summary, the formation of the 2010 Haiti earthquake resulted from the complex interactions of tectonic forces along the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault System. The earthquake's immediate impact was devastating, causing widespread destruction and loss of life. The first day following the quake was characterized by intense shaking, severe damage, and significant challenges in responding to the crisis. The events of January 12, 2010 set the stage for a long and arduous recovery process for Haiti. The earthquake that struck Haiti on January 12, 2010 had a profound and far-reaching impact, particularly on the cities and densely populated areas. The destruction caused by the earthquake was catastrophic, leaving a lasting mark on the urban landscape and the people who lived there. In this part, we will explore the earthquake's impact on Haiti's cities, the immediate effects of the disaster, and the human toll it took. Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, bore the brunt of the earthquake's destructive power. As the most populous city in the country, with over 2 million residents, it was the epicenter of the nation's government, commerce, and culture. The city was already grappling with issues of poverty, inadequate infrastructure, and overcrowding. which only exacerbated the disaster's effects. When the earthquake struck, the results were devastating. The city's buildings, many of which were poorly constructed and lacked proper reinforcement, crumbled under the intense shaking. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble in seconds. Iconic landmarks such as the Presidential Palace, the National Assembly Building, and the Port-au-Prince Cathedral were severely damaged or completely destroyed. Residential areas were hit hardest, with thousands of homes collapsing, often with people trapped inside. The densely packed neighborhoods, built on steep hillsides and unstable ground, were particularly vulnerable to the quake's force. The destruction of these homes left countless families without shelter, forced to live in makeshift camps amid the debris. The town of Léogâne, located near the earthquake's epicenter, suffered near total destruction. It is estimated that up to 90% of the buildings in Léogâne were either destroyed or severely damaged. The town's population, which was around 134,000 at the time, faced an almost unimaginable level of devastation. The loss of life was significant, and the survivors were left with little to no resources to rebuild their lives. The surrounding areas, including smaller towns and rural communities, also experienced severe damage. The earthquake's impact extended beyond the immediate vicinity of the epicenter, with tremors felt across much of the country. However, the lack of infrastructure and the remote location of many of these communities made it difficult for aid to reach them quickly, further compounding their suffering. The earthquake caused widespread damage to Haiti's infrastructure, crippling the country's ability to respond to the disaster and provide for the needs of its people. Roads were severely damaged or blocked by debris, making it nearly impossible for vehicles to pass through. This hampered rescue efforts and delayed the delivery of much-needed aid to affected areas. The port of Port-au-Prince, a vital hub for importing goods and receiving international aid, was severely damaged, with its main wharf partially submerged. This disruption of maritime transportation further isolated Haiti from the outside world in its hour of need. The capital's main airport was also damaged, though it remained operational, becoming a critical lifeline for the influx of international aid and emergency responders. Public utilities, including electricity, water, and sanitation, were heavily impacted by the earthquake. Power outages were widespread, and the city's water supply system was disrupted, leaving many without access to clean drinking water. The lack of basic services increased the risk of disease outbreaks, particularly in the crowded makeshift camps where survivors sought refuge. The human toll of the earthquake was staggering. The Haitian government estimated that over 230,000 people lost their lives as a result of the disaster, though the exact number remains uncertain. Hundreds of thousands more were injured, many with severe life-threatening injuries that required urgent medical attention. The destruction of hospitals and medical facilities left the healthcare system in shambles, unable to cope with the overwhelming number of casualties. In addition to the immediate loss of life, the earthquake left over 1.5 million people homeless. Displaced families were forced to live in temporary shelters, often in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. These makeshift camps sprang up in open spaces, parks, and along roadsides, creating a humanitarian crisis that would persist for years. The emotional and psychological impact on the survivors was profound. Many people lost not only their homes and belongings, but also loved ones. The trauma of the earthquake, coupled with the uncertainty of the future, left deep scars on the Haitian population. The sense of loss and grief was palpable as communities struggled to come to terms with the scale of the disaster. The earthquake also had a devastating impact on Haiti's economy, which was already fragile before the disaster. The destruction of businesses, government buildings, and infrastructure crippled the country's economic activity. The informal sector, which many Haitians relied on for their livelihoods, was particularly hard hit, with markets and small businesses destroyed. Reconstruction efforts would require massive financial resources, far beyond what Haiti could manage on its own. The country's reliance on international aid became even more pronounced in the aftermath of the earthquake, as it faced the daunting task of rebuilding not only its physical infrastructure, but also its economy. The immediate effects of the earthquake left Haiti in a state of crisis. The country faced an unprecedented humanitarian disaster, with millions of people in desperate need of assistance. The scale of the destruction and the challenges of providing aid in such a devastated environment highlighted the vulnerabilities of a nation already struggling with poverty, political instability, and underdevelopment. In the days and weeks that followed the earthquake, the world watched as Haiti grappled with the enormity of the disaster. The international community responded with an outpouring of support, but the road to recovery would be long and arduous. The impact of the earthquake on Haiti's cities, infrastructure, and people was profound, leaving a legacy that would shape the nation's future for years to come. In the immediate aftermath of the 2010 Haiti earthquake, the nation was thrust into a state of chaos and despair. The destruction was so extensive that it affected nearly every aspect of daily life, leaving the country in desperate need of help. Part 4 will explore the aftermath of the disaster, including the widespread destruction of homes and infrastructure, the response to the crisis, and the ongoing struggle for recovery. The earthquake's impact on Haiti's infrastructure was catastrophic, but the destruction of homes and entire communities was even more devastating on a personal level. Over 1.5 million people were displaced, forced to flee their shattered homes and seek shelter wherever they could. Makeshift camps quickly sprang up across Port-au-Prince and surrounding areas as people constructed temporary shelters from whatever materials they could find: sheets, tarps, and pieces of scrap metal. These camps, often overcrowded and lacking basic amenities, became the new reality for many Haitians. Living conditions were dire, with limited access to clean water, sanitation, and healthcare. The spread of disease became a constant threat, particularly in the hot and humid climate. The lack of adequate shelter and the fear of aftershocks added to the physical and psychological toll on survivors. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble with no clear path to rebuilding. The destruction of homes meant not only the loss of personal property, but also the loss of family history and heritage. Many survivors were left to mourn the death of loved ones buried beneath the ruins, as the process of recovering bodies was slow and painful. Haiti's already fragile public services and infrastructure were pushed to the brink of collapse by the earthquake. The destruction of government buildings, including the Presidential Palace and the National Assembly, created a power vacuum at a time when strong leadership was desperately needed. Many government officials were killed or injured, and those who survived struggled to coordinate the country's response to the crisis. The collapse of public services was felt most acutely in the healthcare sector. Hospitals and clinics, many of which had been under-resourced and overcrowded before the disaster, were overwhelmed by the influx of injured and sick people. Medical supplies quickly ran out, and healthcare workers were forced to operate under extreme conditions, often without electricity or running water. The destruction of the main teaching hospital in Port-au-Prince was a significant blow to the country's medical infrastructure, leaving many without access to critical care. Transportation infrastructure was also severely damaged. Roads were blocked by debris, and many bridges were destroyed, cutting off access to remote areas. The Port-au-Prince airport, while still functional, was overwhelmed by the sudden influx of international aid, leading to delays in the distribution of supplies. The destruction of the port further complicated the logistics of bringing in aid and rebuilding materials. In the days following the earthquake, the international community responded with an outpouring of support. Governments, NGOs, and individuals from around the world mobilized to provide aid to the stricken nation. The United Nations, which had already been present in Haiti with a peacekeeping mission, played a central role in coordinating the global response. Countries such as the United States, Canada, France, and many others sent rescue teams, medical personnel, and humanitarian supplies to Haiti. The U.S. military established a significant presence, helping to restore order, distribute aid, and provide medical care. NGOs, both large and small, set up operations on the ground, working alongside local organizations to deliver food, water, shelter, and medical assistance. The global response was unprecedented in scale, but it also highlighted significant challenges. The sheer volume of aid entering the country created bottlenecks in distribution, with supplies piling up at the airport and port while people in need went without. The lack of coordination among the many organizations operating in Haiti led to inefficiencies and duplication of efforts. Despite these challenges, the international aid effort provided critical relief to millions of Haitians. Emergency food distribution helped stave off famine, while medical teams treated thousands of injuries and prevented the outbreak of diseases such as cholera. The presence of international forces helped maintain order in the chaotic environment, preventing widespread looting and violence. While the immediate response to the earthquake focused on saving lives and providing emergency relief, the long-term recovery process proved to be an even greater challenge. Rebuilding Haiti would require more than just repairing physical infrastructure. It would require addressing deep-rooted issues of poverty, governance, and social inequality. One of the most pressing challenges was the need to rebuild homes and provide permanent shelter for the millions of displaced people. However, the lack of land tenure laws and the chaotic nature of land ownership in Haiti complicated efforts to relocate people and rebuild communities. Many people were reluctant to leave the makeshift camps, fearing they would lose their claims to their land or that new homes would not be built in safe locations. Reconstruction efforts were also hampered by the slow disbursement of international aid. While billions of dollars were pledged by governments and organizations around the world, much of the money was tied up in bureaucratic processes, leading to delays in funding for critical projects. Corruption and mismanagement of funds further undermined the recovery process, with many Haitians feeling that the aid was not reaching those who needed it most. The aftermath of the earthquake left Haiti at a crossroads. The destruction was so complete that it offered an opportunity to rebuild not just physical structures, but also the social and economic systems that had contributed to the country's vulnerability. However, the path to recovery was fraught with challenges and progress was slow. For many Haitians, the struggle to rebuild their lives became a daily reality. While some were able to return to their homes or find new housing, many remained in temporary shelters for years after the earthquake. The lack of economic opportunities and the slow pace of reconstruction left many feeling hopeless and forgotten. Despite the hardships, there were also stories of resilience and hope. Communities came together to support one another, and local organizations played a crucial role in the recovery process. The earthquake had exposed the weaknesses of Haiti's institutions, but it had also shown the strength and determination of its people. The struggle for recovery in Haiti is ongoing, and the road ahead remains difficult. The earthquake was a defining moment in the country's history, one that reshaped its future and left a lasting impact on its people. The efforts to rebuild Haiti continue, driven by the hope that out of the rubble, a stronger and more resilient nation can emerge. The 2010 Haiti earthquake was a catastrophe that profoundly altered the course of the nation's history. The earthquake's legacy extends far beyond the immediate destruction and loss of life. It is a story of resilience, recovery, and the ongoing challenges that the Haitian people continue to face. The earthquake left an indelible mark on Haiti, reshaping its landscape, society, and economy. Entire communities were wiped out, and the physical scars of the disaster are still visible today in the ruined buildings and makeshift camps that persist across the country. The earthquake also had a deep psychological impact, leaving many Haitians grappling with trauma and loss. The memory of the disaster is a constant presence in the national consciousness, a reminder of the vulnerability and fragility of life. The disaster also brought to light the profound challenges that Haiti faced long before the earthquake. Poverty, political instability, and weak infrastructure had made the country especially vulnerable to such a disaster, and the earthquake exposed these systemic issues in stark relief. The struggle to rebuild Haiti in the aftermath of the earthquake became a symbol of the broader struggle for justice, equality, and development in the nation. In the wake of the earthquake, the international community rallied around Haiti, providing unprecedented levels of aid and support. The world's response was a testament to global solidarity, with governments, NGOs, and individuals from all corners of the globe coming together to help a nation in need. However, the international response was also fraught with challenges and controversies. The slow pace of aid disbursement, the lack of coordination among relief efforts, and allegations of corruption and mismanagement all hindered the recovery process. Despite these issues, the global response played a crucial role in saving lives and stabilizing the country in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. International aid provided critical resources for rebuilding infrastructure, healthcare, and education, and many of these efforts continue to this day. However, the experience of the earthquake also highlighted the limitations of foreign aid and the importance of empowering local communities to lead their own recovery. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the 2010 Haiti earthquake is the resilience of the Haitian people. In the face of unimaginable adversity, Haitians showed incredible strength and determination, coming together to rebuild their lives and their communities. Local organizations, grassroots movements, and individual acts of kindness and solidarity played a crucial role in the recovery process, often filling gaps left by international efforts. The road to recovery has been long and difficult, and many challenges remain. Haiti continues to struggle with poverty, political instability, and the effects of natural disasters. The process of rebuilding has been slow, and many of the promises made in the aftermath of the earthquake have yet to be fulfilled. But the resilience of the Haitian people offers hope for the future. Over the years, Haiti has taken steps toward recovery and development, New infrastructure has been built, healthcare and education have improved in some areas, and there have been efforts to strengthen governance and reduce corruption. While progress has been uneven and setbacks frequent, there is a sense that Haiti is slowly moving forward. The 2010 Haiti earthquake offers many lessons for the world. It is a stark reminder of the importance of disaster preparedness and the need to address the underlying vulnerabilities that make some communities more susceptible to the impacts of natural disasters. It also highlights the complexities of international aid and the importance of ensuring that recovery efforts are inclusive, accountable, and driven by the needs and voices of those most affected. For Haiti, the earthquake was a turning point, a moment that exposed the deep-seated challenges facing the nation, but also one that sparked a renewed commitment to building a better future. The disaster forced the country to confront its vulnerabilities, but it also galvanized efforts to create a more resilient and equitable society. As Haiti continues to rebuild, the memory of the 2010 earthquake remains a powerful force in shaping the nation's future. The disaster left a legacy of loss and suffering, but it also sparked a renewed sense of solidarity and hope. The journey toward recovery is far from over, but the resilience and determination of the Haitian people offer a beacon of hope for the future. In the years since the earthquake, Haiti has faced many challenges, but it has also shown remarkable strength. The road ahead is uncertain, but there is a sense that out of the devastation, a stronger and more resilient Haiti can emerge. The 2010 earthquake will forever be a part of Haiti's history, but it does not define the country. Instead, it serves as a reminder of the power of resilience and the enduring hope for a better tomorrow. The 1964 Alaska earthquake, also known as the Great Alaskan Earthquake or the Good Friday Earthquake, was a devastating natural disaster that struck Alaska on the evening of March 27, 1964. The quake occurred at 5:36 p.m. Alaska Standard Time and is remembered as one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. With a magnitude of 9.2, it remains the largest earthquake in North American history and the second largest globally since modern seismography began in 1900. This disaster took place in the south-central region of Alaska, affecting numerous cities and towns, including Anchorage, Seward, and Valdez. It lasted for nearly 4.5 minutes, but the destruction that followed was catastrophic. Massive ground fissures, landslides, and collapsing buildings wreaked havoc on the area, while a series of deadly tsunamis triggered by the quake caused further devastation along the Alaskan coastline and beyond. The backstory to this earthquake involves the slow but immense pressure that had built up between two tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Over centuries, these plates had been pushing against each other, creating enormous stress deep beneath the Earth's surface. When that pressure finally released on that Good Friday in 1964, the impact was felt far and wide, not only in Alaska, but also in places as far away as Japan and California. In the days leading up to the quake, there were no clear signs or warnings. The people of Alaska, much like the rest of the world, were caught completely off guard when the Earth began to shake violently that evening. The Alaska earthquake of 1964 was caused by the movement of the Pacific and North American tectonic plates. Alaska sits on the boundary between these two plates, which are part of the larger Pacific Ring of Fire, an area known for frequent seismic activity. For centuries, the Pacific Plate had been slowly pushing beneath the North American Plate in a process called subduction. As the plates moved, immense pressure built up where they met, and by March of 1964, that pressure was at its breaking point. On March 27th, the stress that had been accumulating beneath the Earth's crust was suddenly released, leading to the massive 9.2 magnitude earthquake. The rupture occurred about 15 miles below the surface, and it stretched across an area roughly 500 miles long and 125 miles wide. The force of the earthquake caused the ground to shake violently, and in some places, the land rose or sank by as much as 38 feet. In the first few moments of the quake, the ground motion was so intense that it made standing or walking impossible for anyone caught outside. Buildings swayed, roads cracked, and entire neighborhoods shifted as the ground beneath them heaved. As the earthquake continued for more than 4 minutes, it became clear that this was no ordinary tremor. People across Alaska were experiencing a catastrophe unlike anything they had ever seen. While the shaking was terrifying, the real damage was still to come. In the hours following the earthquake, Massive aftershocks, some of them as strong as magnitude 7, continued to rattle the region, deepening the destruction. The impact of the 1964 Alaska earthquake on cities and towns was nothing short of catastrophic. Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, was hit particularly hard. Buildings that had once stood tall crumbled under the force of the earthquake. Entire sections of the city were leveled as the ground split open and buckled. In some neighborhoods, houses were ripped apart as the land beneath them shifted dramatically. The city's downtown area saw significant damage, with large structures collapsing and streets becoming impassable due to deep cracks and fissures. Seward, a small town located near the epicenter, experienced unimaginable devastation. The earthquake triggered landslides that tore through the town, and within minutes, fires broke out as fuel tanks exploded. But the worst was yet to come. Minutes after the earthquake, a massive tsunami hit the town, washing away buildings, docks, and everything in its path. The water surged through the streets, dragging debris and leaving a trail of destruction. In Valdez, another coastal town, the earthquake's impact was equally devastating. A section of the waterfront slid into the sea, taking homes and buildings with it. Valdez also faced a terrifying tsunami that swept away parts of the town. Waves as high as 200 feet hit the coastline, and residents who had survived the initial earthquake now faced the deadly power of the sea. Kodiak, located further south, also suffered from the earthquake's impact. The powerful shaking caused severe damage to the town, and within minutes, the tsunami hit, destroying homes and businesses. The water rose rapidly, submerging large areas and leaving destruction in its wake. The port, a vital part of the town's economy, was wiped out as the tsunami waves obliterated docks and boats. Beyond the immediate destruction, the earthquake also caused landslides and avalanches across Alaska's rugged terrain. Whole mountainsides collapsed, and in remote areas, entire forests were flattened. The impact was felt far beyond Alaska, with shaking reported as far away as California and Japan. The aftermath of the 1964 Alaska earthquake was as challenging as the disaster itself. The destruction was widespread, leaving thousands of people without homes, businesses in ruins, and entire communities cut off from the outside world. In Anchorage, nearly every major building had been damaged or destroyed, leaving residents to grapple with the loss of their homes, schools, and workplaces. Temporary shelters were quickly set up to house those who had been displaced, but the scale of the damage meant that recovery would take years. One of the most devastating effects of the earthquake was the destruction of infrastructure. Roads and bridges were wiped out or severely damaged, making it nearly impossible to reach some of the most affected areas. The main highway connecting Anchorage to other parts of Alaska had collapsed in many places, and in the coastal towns, the destruction of ports and harbors left communities isolated. Relief efforts were hampered by these challenges as rescuers struggled to reach those in need. The U.S. military played a crucial role in the disaster response, deploying resources to help with search and rescue operations and to deliver supplies to the hardest hit areas. Military planes and helicopters flew over remote parts of the state, dropping food, water, and medical supplies to isolated communities. Naval ships were sent to coastal towns like Valdez and Seward, where the combination of the earthquake and the tsunami had caused near total devastation. The psychological impact on the people of Alaska was profound. Many who had survived the earthquake were left traumatized by the loss of loved ones, homes, and livelihoods. The constant aftershocks, some of which were strong enough to cause further damage, kept the population in a state of fear and uncertainty for weeks after the initial earthquake. In total, more than 100 aftershocks were recorded in the first 24 hours alone, and they continued for months, adding to the already immense sense of unease. As the initial shock wore off, the long process of rebuilding began. Volunteers and relief organizations from across the country came to Alaska to help with the recovery efforts. Engineers and construction crews worked tirelessly to repair the infrastructure, rebuild homes, and restore vital services. But despite these efforts, the full recovery would take years, and some of the damage, particularly in coastal areas like Valdez, was so severe that entire communities had to be relocated. In the years following the 1964 Alaska earthquake, the state gradually rebuilt itself, but the scars of the disaster were long-lasting. The earthquake left an indelible mark, not just on the land, but on the people of Alaska, who had to adapt to the new reality of living in a region with such immense geological power. Buildings and infrastructure were redesigned to be more earthquake-resistant, and new safety protocols were developed. to ensure that communities would be better prepared for future disasters. One of the most important changes that came out of the earthquake was a greater understanding of seismic activity, particularly in Alaska. Scientists from all over the world flocked to the state in the aftermath of the disaster, studying the effects of the earthquake and the tsunamis that followed. Their research led to important advances in the field of seismology, including the development of better monitoring systems that could provide early warnings of future quakes. This knowledge would go on to inform earthquake preparedness efforts not just in Alaska, but in other earthquake-prone regions around the world. For many of the survivors, the memories of March 27, 1964, never faded. The earthquake had taken lives, destroyed homes, and reshaped entire communities, but it also brought out the resilience and strength of the Alaskan people. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and solidarity became part of the collective memory as residents supported each other through the darkest hours and rebuilt their communities from the ground up. The earthquake also left a legacy of awareness and preparedness. Public education campaigns were launched to ensure that Alaskans knew how to respond in the event of another major quake. Regular drills and preparedness exercises became part of life in schools and workplaces across the state, ensuring that future generations would be ready if and when disaster struck again. In the end, the 1964 Alaska earthquake remains one of the most powerful natural disasters in U.S. history. It reshaped not just the physical landscape of Alaska, but also the mindset of its people, creating a legacy of resilience and preparedness. While the state has seen other disasters in the years since, none have left a mark quite like the Good Friday earthquake, a day that forever changed Alaska. In the early days of September 1900, the bustling coastal city of Galveston, Texas, was completely unaware of the devastation that was about to unfold. Known as the Wall Street of the Southwest, Galveston was one of the wealthiest and most important ports in the United States. The city's prime location on Galveston Island along the Gulf of Mexico had made it a hub of trade and commerce, and its population had grown rapidly, reaching nearly 38,000 by 1900. However, this prosperity came with a dangerous sense of complacency. The city had weathered numerous storms in the past, and the residents believed that they would easily survive any future storms. Even Isaac Klein, the head of the Weather Bureau's Galveston office, famously wrote in an 1891 article that it would be impossible for a hurricane of significant strength to strike the island. But all of that changed on September 8, 1900, when the Great Galveston Hurricane made landfall. This storm, later known as the deadliest natural disaster in United States history, would go on to claim the lives of an estimated 8,000 people, with some reports suggesting that the number could be as high as 12,000. The city of Galveston was devastated, with nearly every building suffering damage and thousands of homes destroyed. In a matter of hours, the thriving city was reduced to ruins, and the lives of countless families were forever altered. The 1900 Galveston hurricane wasn't just a local disaster, it was a tragedy of epic proportions that had a profound impact on the entire nation. The storm ended Galveston's golden era as potential investors turned to nearby Houston, fearful of future hurricanes. In the wake of the storm, significant changes were made, including the construction of a seawall to protect the city and the raising of the island itself. This introduction sets the stage for a closer look at how this catastrophic event unfolded, starting with the formation of the storm and the initial signs that something was amiss. In the next part, we'll explore how the hurricane developed and the preparations, or lack thereof, that were made as the storm approached the Texas coast. The 1900 Galveston hurricane began its deadly journey as a tropical storm in the far eastern Atlantic Ocean off the coast of West Africa in late August. At the time, meteorology was still a developing science, and the tools available to track and predict storms were rudimentary at best. Despite these limitations, weather observers noticed the formation of a storm system that appeared to be gaining strength as it moved westward across the warm waters of the Atlantic. By the end of the first week of September, the storm had intensified into a full-fledged hurricane, although its exact path remained uncertain. In those days, the United States Weather Bureau, which later became the National Weather Service, relied heavily on reports from ships at sea and limited land-based observations. Communication between different regions was slow, and information about the storm was often outdated by the time it reached the public. As the hurricane approached the Caribbean, it made its first significant landfall in Cuba on September 6th. The storm caused considerable damage but did not lead to widespread alarm in the United States. Unfortunately, the Cuban meteorologists' warnings about the storm's potential severity were largely dismissed by their American counterparts. The Weather Bureau in Washington, D.C. predicted that the storm would veer northeastward and spare the Gulf Coast. They did not realize that the hurricane was about to take a more dangerous course. On September 7th, the storm entered the Gulf of Mexico, where it encountered ideal conditions for further intensification. The waters of the Gulf were exceptionally warm, providing the energy needed for the hurricane to strengthen rapidly. By now, it was clear that the storm was heading toward the Texas coast, but the residents of Galveston remained largely unaware of the impending danger. Isaac Klein, the head of the Weather Bureau's Galveston office, had noticed some concerning signs. The Gulf waters were rising, the wind was picking up, and the barometric pressure was dropping, a clear indication that a powerful storm was approaching. However, like many others, Klein did not believe that a hurricane of great strength could strike Galveston. He assured the public that there was no cause for alarm, even as the signs of an approaching storm became more ominous. By the evening of September 7th, the weather in Galveston had begun to deteriorate rapidly. Heavy rain and strong winds battered the city, but most residents believed it was just another typical Gulf storm. Some even ventured out to the beaches to watch the waves crash against the shore, unaware that within hours those very waves would rise up and engulf their city. As night fell, the storm continued to intensify and the fate of Galveston was sealed. The lack of preparation and the underestimation of the storm's severity would prove to be catastrophic. In the next part, we will delve into the day of the hurricane, when the full force of the storm struck the city, bringing with it unimaginable destruction and loss of life. On the morning of September 8, 1900, the residents of Galveston awoke to a scene that was already foreboding. The winds had grown stronger overnight, whipping through the streets with increasing ferocity. The sky was a heavy, ominous gray, and the usually calm waters of the Gulf had transformed into a raging, turbulent mass. By mid-morning, the situation had become more alarming, as the winds reached hurricane force and the tide began to surge. Despite the growing danger, many in Galveston remained unaware of the severity of the storm that was about to engulf their city. Some who lived in more vulnerable areas near the coast had begun to move to higher ground, or to the homes of friends and family. Others, however, believed the storm would pass without significant incident, as so many storms had before. The lack of an official evacuation order or any clear warning only added to the sense of false security. By midday, the full force of the hurricane had arrived. The winds, now exceeding 100 miles per hour, tore through the city, ripping roofs off houses, toppling trees, and turning loose debris into deadly projectiles. The storm's surge, a massive wall of water pushed ashore by the power of the hurricane, began to inundate the island. Water levels rose rapidly, flooding streets, homes, and businesses. The low-lying areas of Galveston were quickly submerged, and the floodwaters continued to rise with alarming speed. The waves, driven by the relentless winds, battered the seawall-less island with incredible force. Entire neighborhoods were swept away as houses, unable to withstand the surge, collapsed and were carried off by the floodwaters. People who had sought refuge in their homes found themselves trapped by the rising water, with few options for escape. Panic set in as the reality of the situation became clear. This was not just a severe storm, it was a catastrophic hurricane unlike anything Galveston had ever experienced. As the day wore on, the situation grew increasingly dire. The winds continued to strengthen, now reaching their peak at over 130 miles per hour. The storm's surge rose higher, swallowing more of the city and leaving only the tallest buildings and structures above water. Many sought refuge in the few large buildings that remained standing. But even these were not immune to the storm's wrath. The sounds of crashing waves, howling winds, and the destruction of buildings filled the air, creating a terrifying cacophony. The city's communication with the outside world had been cut off, leaving those in Galveston isolated and without any way to call for help. The Weather Bureau had no way of knowing the true extent of the disaster unfolding on the island, and the residents could only rely on their instincts to survive. Some attempted to flee to higher ground, while others clung to whatever they could find, hoping to ride out the storm. By nightfall, the hurricane's fury showed no signs of abating. The floodwaters continued to rise, and the winds, though beginning to taper slightly, were still devastating. The once vibrant city of Galveston was now a scene of utter devastation. Entire neighborhoods had been wiped out, and countless lives were in peril. The destruction was so widespread that it was difficult to comprehend the full scale of the disaster. As the storm finally began to move inland and lose strength, the people of Galveston were left to face the horrifying aftermath. In the next part, we will explore the aftermath of the hurricane, the devastating loss of life, and the heroic efforts of those who survived to help rebuild their shattered city. As the winds finally subsided and the floodwaters began to recede, the true extent of the devastation in Galveston became horrifyingly clear. The city, once a bustling hub of commerce and culture, now lay in ruins. Entire neighborhoods had been obliterated, reduced to little more than piles of debris. The elegant mansions that lined the coast, the bustling downtown businesses, and the modest homes of working families were all gone, swallowed by the storm and the sea. Survivors emerged from their makeshift shelters to find a landscape that was almost unrecognizable. Streets were buried under mountains of wreckage, with shattered timbers, broken glass, and twisted metal strewn everywhere. The floodwaters, which had risen as much as 15 feet in some places, had left behind a thick layer of mud and silt, further complicating the already overwhelming task of recovery. The air was thick with the stench of salt water, mud, and decay, and the eerie silence that followed the storm was punctuated only by the sounds of people searching for loved ones and beginning the grim task of collecting the dead. The loss of life was staggering. Estimates of the death toll vary, but it is widely believed that between 6,000 and 12,000 people perished in the hurricane, making it the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. Bodies were found everywhere, trapped in the wreckage of their homes, washed up on the shore, or buried under debris. The sheer number of dead overwhelmed the city's ability to deal with them, and many were buried in mass graves or simply lost to the sea. The survivors, many of whom had lost everything, were left to grieve in the midst of unimaginable destruction. The city's infrastructure was in shambles. The water supply was contaminated by salt water and debris, making it unsafe to drink. The telegraph and telephone lines, which had once connected Galveston to the outside world, were down, leaving the city isolated and without a means to call for help. The railroad bridges that connected the island to the mainland had been destroyed, cutting off any possibility of bringing in supplies or evacuating the wounded and displaced. In the absence of any formal communication, rumors and fear spread quickly among the survivors, adding to the sense of chaos and despair. Despite the overwhelming devastation, the people of Galveston did not give up. In the days following the hurricane, a massive and heroic recovery effort began. Those who had survived the storm immediately set to work, clearing debris, searching for survivors, and caring for the wounded. Makeshift hospitals were established in the few buildings that remained standing, and volunteers worked tirelessly to provide food, water, and shelter to those who had lost everything. Word of the disaster slowly began to reach the mainland, and help soon arrived. Relief efforts were organized, and supplies began to trickle in by boat, the only means of access to the island. The U.S. Army was dispatched to assist with the recovery, and volunteers from across the country came to Galveston to help with the monumental task of rebuilding. The city's residents, though devastated by their losses, showed remarkable resilience and determination as they began to piece their lives back together. The rebuilding process was slow and fraught with challenges. With so much of the city destroyed, there was a shortage of materials and labor, and the work was often dangerous. Many of the buildings that had survived the storm were damaged beyond repair and had to be demolished, further adding to the sense of loss. But despite these difficulties, the people of Galveston pressed on, driven by a desire to rebuild their city and honor the memory of those who had been lost. In the final part, we will explore how Galveston rose from the ashes of this disaster, the lessons learned from the hurricane, and the lasting impact it had on the city and its people. In the aftermath of the hurricane, Galveston faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding a city nearly wiped off the map. The task was daunting, but the people of Galveston were determined to restore their home. The process began with clearing the massive amounts of debris that littered the island. This was no small feat, as the storm had left behind mountains of rubble, tangled with remnants of homes, businesses, and lives that had been lost. Volunteers, military personnel, and the remaining residents worked tirelessly to clear the streets and begin the long process of reconstruction. Now, one of the most significant and ambitious projects undertaken was the raising of the entire city. Engineers proposed elevating Galveston to protect it from future storms, a project that was both unprecedented and monumental in scope. Buildings were jacked up, sometimes as much as 17 feet, and sand and dirt were pumped in to fill the space below. Streets were raised, and a new seawall stretching more than 10 miles was constructed to shield the island from future storm surges. This engineering marvel not only transformed the landscape of Galveston, but also demonstrated the city's resilience and commitment to surviving in a perilous environment. the economic impact of the hurricane was profound. Before the storm, Galveston had been a major port and one of the wealthiest cities in Texas, known for its vibrant culture and booming economy. The hurricane, however, shifted that prosperity to nearby Houston, which emerged as the region's new economic powerhouse. Despite this shift, Galveston remained an important city, continuing to thrive in new ways. Tourism became a significant industry as visitors flocked to see the seawall and the city's ongoing recovery efforts. The storm also had a lasting impact on disaster preparedness and response. The 1900 Galveston hurricane is often cited as a pivotal moment in the development of modern meteorology and emergency management. The scale of the disaster highlighted the need for better forecasting, communication, and evacuation planning. Lessons learned from Galveston influenced policies and procedures that would be implemented in future disasters, helping to save countless lives in the years to come. Galveston's recovery was not just about rebuilding structures, it was about healing a community that had been deeply scarred by tragedy. The loss of thousands of lives left a permanent mark on the city's collective memory, and the stories of those who perished became a part of Galveston's history. Memorials were erected and annual commemorations were held to honor the victims and to remind future generations of the city's resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. Today, Galveston stands as a testament to the strength and determination of its people. The city has evolved, but it has never forgotten the lessons of the past. The seawall, the raised buildings, and the memorials are enduring symbols of the city's commitment to protecting its future while honoring its history. Galveston's story is one of survival, resilience, and rebirth, a powerful reminder that even in the face of overwhelming disaster, a community can rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. The 1900 Galveston hurricane remains the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history, but it also serves as a story of hope and recovery. Galveston's ability to rebuild and adapt has inspired countless others, proving that even the most devastating tragedies can lead to renewal and growth. The city's legacy continues to live on, not only in the physical structures that were rebuilt, but also in the spirit of its people, who faced one of nature's fiercest storms and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and resilience. In the summer of 1931, China faced one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, the 1931 China floods, also known as the Yangtze River floods. Spanning from June to August, these floods devastated central and eastern China, leaving a trail of destruction and loss across major cities like Wuhan, Nanjing, and beyond. This catastrophe was not just an isolated event, but the culmination of a series of extreme weather conditions that had plagued the region for several years. The backstory of these floods begins in the late 1920s, when China was already grappling with severe droughts from 1928 to 1930. These droughts had a significant impact on the country, drying up rivers and reducing water levels to dangerous lows. But the winter of 1930 brought a harsh twist, as heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures covered the mountainous areas with thick layers of snow and ice. As the winter gave way to spring in 1931, this snow and ice began to melt, and the resulting water flowed downstream into the Yangtze River. Ordinarily, the Yangtze River and its surrounding areas experienced seasonal flooding during the spring, summer, and fall. However, the continuous melting combined with heavy rainfall in early 1931 created a situation that was far from ordinary. By June, those living in low-lying areas along the river had already been forced to abandon their homes as water levels rose at an alarming rate. The summer of 1931 was marked by intense cyclonic activity, with 9 cyclones hitting the region in July alone, far above the average of 2 per year. These cyclones brought unprecedented amounts of rain, further swelling the rivers and causing water levels to reach new heights. By the time the floodwaters peaked in August, much of central and eastern China was underwater. The floodwaters inundated an area of about 180,000 square kilometers, roughly equivalent in size to the combined states of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Cities like Wuhan were submerged, and the scale of the disaster was so immense that it quickly overwhelmed local authorities and communities. This introduction sets the stage for understanding how the 1931 floods developed into one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in human history. The combination of natural factors, ranging from severe droughts and harsh winters to unrelenting cyclones, created a perfect storm that would lead to untold devastation in the months to come. As we move forward, we'll explore how these events unfolded, the sheer scale of destruction that followed, and the lasting impact of this disaster on China and its people. As 1931 began, a series of environmental conditions converged to create the perfect storm for what would become one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. In the years leading up to the flood, China had experienced a long drought from 1928 to 1930, which left the ground parched and unable to absorb water effectively. The winter of 1930-1931 was particularly harsh, with severe cold spells that deposited large amounts of snow and ice across the mountainous regions. This snow and ice were set to become a major factor in the unfolding disaster. As the harsh winter gave way to spring, the snow and ice began to melt rapidly, sending torrents of water downstream into the Yangtze River and its tributaries. Ordinarily, this region would experience 3 distinct periods of high water: spring, summer, and fall. But in 1931, the water flow was relentless, combining all 3 high water periods into one continuous, overwhelming deluge. As early as June, the situation was already dire, with heavy rains compounding the melting snow and ice. The Yangtze River swelled to levels not seen since records began, causing those living in low-lying areas to abandon their homes in fear of what was to come. Adding to the chaos, the summer of 1931 saw an unprecedented level of cyclonic activity. 9 cyclones struck the region in July alone, a sharp increase from the usual 2 per year. The torrential rains brought by these storms saturated the ground further, with 4 weather stations along the Yangtze River reporting rainfall exceeding 600 millimeters for the month. The river, already swollen from months of heavy water flow, reached dangerously high levels, pushing against dikes and levees that had held firm for decades. Despite the growing danger, preparations for such a catastrophe were minimal. The flood control infrastructure, already weakened by years of neglect and mismanagement, was simply not equipped to handle the massive volume of water. Communities along the river, already strained from years of drought and economic hardship, were caught off guard by the severity of the situation. Efforts to strengthen dikes and build temporary barriers were quickly overwhelmed as the water levels continued to rise. By late July, it was clear that a disaster of unprecedented scale was imminent. The river's water levels were now at their highest point in living memory, and the first signs of flooding began to appear in low-lying areas. People scrambled to save what they could, but the sheer magnitude of the impending flood left little time for effective evacuation. The stage was set for the 1931 China floods to unleash their full fury on the unsuspecting population. The catastrophic impact of the 1931 China floods began to fully manifest in August. The relentless rains continued, and the Yangtze River, along with other major rivers like the Huai and Yellow Rivers, could no longer contain the immense volume of water. On August 1st, the Yangtze River burst its banks, and the floodwaters surged into the surrounding countryside, overwhelming dikes and inundating vast areas of land. Entire towns and villages were swallowed by the advancing waters. The floods swept through the landscape with unstoppable force, destroying homes, farmlands, and infrastructure. Roads and railways were submerged, cutting off communication and transportation routes, making it nearly impossible for aid to reach the affected areas. The situation was dire, and the people caught in the flood's path had little chance to escape. As the floodwaters spread, the scale of the devastation became clearer. The city of Wuhan, one of China's most important industrial and commercial centers, was among the hardest hit. The city was submerged under several feet of water, leaving only the tops of buildings visible in some areas. The residents of Wuhan, along with millions of others across the floodplain, were forced to seek refuge on rooftops, in trees, and on any high ground they could find. Many clung to makeshift rafts or debris, desperately trying to survive. In the countryside, the situation was even more grim. The floodwaters turned fertile farmlands into vast muddy lakes. Crops that were nearing harvest were destroyed, leading to widespread food shortages. Livestock drowned in the rising waters, further exacerbating the looming famine. The floods also displaced millions of people, leaving them homeless and without access to clean water, food, or medical care. The death toll began to climb rapidly. Drowning claimed the lives of countless individuals in the immediate aftermath of the flood, but the disaster's impact went far beyond the initial surge of water. The stagnant floodwaters became breeding grounds for disease, and epidemics of cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever spread rapidly through the overcrowded and unsanitary conditions in which survivors were forced to live. Malnutrition and exposure to the elements further weakened the already vulnerable population. The government, already stretched thin by economic troubles and political instability, struggled to respond effectively to the crisis. Relief efforts were hampered by the scale of the disaster and the sheer number of people in need. Local authorities and international aid organizations did what they could, but resources were limited and the needs were overwhelming. As the floodwaters slowly receded, they left behind a landscape of devastation. The physical destruction was immense, but the human toll was even greater. The 1931 China floods were not just a natural disaster, but a humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The country would be left to grapple with the aftermath for years to come. In the aftermath of the 1931 China floods, the devastation was almost unimaginable. As the floodwaters gradually receded, they revealed a landscape utterly transformed by the disaster. Farmlands that had once been lush and fertile were now barren, coated in a thick layer of silt and debris. The flood had destroyed crops, homes, and infrastructure, leaving millions of people without shelter or means of livelihood. The immediate concern in the weeks following the flood was the humanitarian crisis. With millions of people displaced, there was an urgent need for food, clean water, and medical care. Relief efforts were mounted, but they were hampered by the sheer scale of the disaster. Roads and railways remained damaged or submerged, making it difficult to transport supplies to the worst affected areas. The government, already struggling with internal political instability, found it challenging to coordinate a response on such a massive scale. In the refugee camps that sprung up across the region, conditions were dire. Overcrowding and unsanitary living conditions led to the rapid spread of diseases. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever claimed thousands of lives, adding to the already staggering death toll. The lack of adequate food supplies resulted in widespread malnutrition, and many survivors succumbed to hunger and disease. The social impact of the floods was profound. Families were torn apart, with many losing loved ones to the floodwaters or the subsequent epidemics. The loss of homes and livelihoods meant that entire communities were plunged into poverty, with little hope of recovery in the near term. The psychological trauma of the disaster left deep scars on the survivors, many of whom had witnessed unimaginable horrors during the flood. The economic consequences were equally severe. The destruction of farmlands and the loss of the harvest led to food shortages and skyrocketing prices. The agricultural sector, which was the backbone of China's economy at the time, was decimated. This in turn led to a sharp increase in poverty and unemployment, as farmers and laborers found themselves without work. The disaster also had long-term political repercussions. The government's inadequate response to the crisis fueled public dissatisfaction and unrest. The inability to provide effective relief and the perceived indifference of the authorities to the suffering of the people undermined the government's legitimacy and contributed to the growing sense of discontent across the country. International aid did arrive, but it was not enough to meet the overwhelming needs of the affected population. While various relief organizations and foreign governments provided assistance, the scale of the disaster meant that many people continued to suffer for months and even years after the floodwaters had receded. The 1931 China floods were a turning point in the nation's history. They exposed the vulnerabilities of the country's infrastructure and governance and highlighted the need for better disaster preparedness and response. The lessons learned from this catastrophe would eventually lead to changes in flood control measures and disaster management strategies, but for those who lived through it, the impact of the floods would be felt for a lifetime. The legacy of the 1931 China floods is a somber reminder of the catastrophic power of natural disasters and the profound impact they can have on society. In the years that followed, efforts were made to prevent such a tragedy from occurring again. The government began investing in more comprehensive flood control measures, including the construction of dams, levees, and improved drainage systems. These initiatives were aimed at better managing the country's vast river systems and reducing the risk of future floods. One of the key lessons learned from the 1931 floods was the importance of early warning systems in disaster preparedness. The lack of timely information and coordinated response had exacerbated the scale of the disaster. In response, meteorological and hydrological monitoring systems were gradually improved, allowing for more accurate predictions of potential floods and better planning for evacuation and relief efforts. However, the memory of the 1931 floods also served as a stark reminder of the need for sustainable development and environmental stewardship. Deforestation, land reclamation, and other practices that disrupted natural water flows were recognized as contributing factors to the severity of the floods. This realization led to increased awareness of the importance of protecting natural ecosystems as a means of mitigating the impact of future floods. On a social level, the floods had a lasting impact on the people of China. The survivors carried with them the trauma and loss of the disaster, and the event became a defining moment in the collective memory of the nation. It was a time of immense suffering, but also of resilience, as communities came together to rebuild their lives in the aftermath. The 1931 China floods remain one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, with an estimated death toll ranging from 1 million to 4 million people. The exact number may never be known, but the scale of the tragedy is undeniable. The disaster highlighted the need for stronger infrastructure, better disaster preparedness, and a more compassionate response to those in need. In the decades since, China has made significant strides in disaster management and flood control. Modern technology and improved infrastructure have reduced the risk of such a catastrophic event occurring again. Yet, the memory of the 1931 floods continues to serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance, preparation, and the human cost of environmental neglect. As we reflect on the 1931 China floods, we are reminded of the delicate balance between nature and human civilization. It is a balance that requires constant attention and respect, for when it is disrupted, the consequences can be devastating. The floods of 1931 are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity and a sobering reminder of the need to protect our environment and prepare for the challenges that nature may bring. The 2010 Chile earthquake was one of the most powerful earthquakes in recent history. It occurred off the coast of central Chile on Saturday, February 27th, 2010 at 3:34 in the morning local time. The earthquake had a magnitude of 8.8 and shook the region for about 3 minutes. It was felt across 6 Chilean regions, from Valparaiso in the north to Araucanía in the south, affecting nearly 80% of the country's population. This earthquake was the largest to hit Chile since the devastating 19 Valdivia earthquake, which remains the most powerful earthquake ever recorded. As with previous quakes, this disaster left a lasting mark on the country's landscape and its people. The epicenter of the earthquake was located off the coast of Pelujehue, a small town in the Mall region. The earthquake was also felt as far away as Buenos Aires, Argentina, and even in parts of southern Peru. Chile's capital, Santiago, experienced intense shaking as well, though the worst damage occurred closer to the epicenter, particularly in the city of Concepcion. This earthquake, along with the resulting tsunami, had far-reaching consequences not only for Chile but also for distant locations like California and Japan. Warnings were issued across 53 countries in preparation for the tsunami's arrival. Chile is situated on the boundary between 2 tectonic plates, the Nazca and South American plates, making it particularly vulnerable to these types of natural disasters. The earthquake that struck Chile on February 27, 2010, formed along the converging boundary of the Nazca and South American tectonic plates. These plates have been moving toward each other for millions of years, creating what is known as a subduction zone. In this case, the Nazca plate is slowly being pushed underneath the South American plate at a rate of about 80 millimeters per year. Over time, pressure builds up along this fault line until it is released in the form of a massive earthquake. The 2010 Chile earthquake was the result of many years of accumulated stress between these 2 plates, finally releasing in a sudden and violent event. Before the earthquake, Chile had experienced several smaller tremors, but there was no clear indication that a major quake was imminent. Preparations for earthquakes in Chile were already part of life, as the country sits on one of the most active seismic zones in the world. People were accustomed to earthquake drills and preparedness measures. However, nothing could fully prepare them for the scale of destruction that was about to unfold. On the night of the earthquake, people in the affected areas were asleep when the ground began to shake violently. Buildings swayed, roads cracked, and the sound of crumbling structures filled the air as the earthquake continued for nearly 3 minutes, followed by strong aftershocks. As the earthquake struck, it unleashed unimaginable destruction across central Chile. The hardest hit areas included the cities of Concepcion, Arauco, and Coronel, which experienced the strongest shaking. In these areas, buildings collapsed, roads were destroyed, and entire communities were cut off from outside help. The capital city, Santiago, also suffered significant damage, though it was less severe than in other regions. The intense shaking caused massive blackouts, leaving 93% of the Chilean population without power. Communication lines were disrupted, making it difficult for people to contact loved ones or get emergency assistance. The earthquake also triggered a tsunami that devastated coastal towns, including the port city of Talcahuano. Waves crashed onto the shores, sweeping away homes, boats, and vehicles. The tsunami warnings issued across the Pacific helped prevent further loss of life, but some areas were caught off guard. Chilean officials later estimated that the combination of the earthquake and tsunami had left over 500 people dead, 25 missing, and countless others injured. The total economic losses were staggering, with estimates ranging between $15 and $30 billion. Coastal communities were particularly vulnerable, and their recovery would take years. In the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, the destruction was overwhelming. Entire towns lay in ruins, and many people were left homeless. Roughly 9% of the population in the affected areas lost their homes, and for days, thousands of people slept outside, afraid to return to their damaged buildings due to the threat of aftershocks. The government declared a state of catastrophe, and President Michelle Bachelet deployed military troops to restore order and assist in the rescue and relief efforts. Emergency services scrambled to provide aid to the injured and stranded, while volunteers and international organizations joined in the recovery efforts. The earthquake had a profound impact on Chile's natural environment. Coastal regions experienced significant changes, with some areas uplifted by up to 3 meters. These shifts caused new land masses to emerge, altering the local landscape permanently. The powerful earthquake also shifted entire cities. For example, Santiago moved nearly 28 centimeters to the west, while the city of Concepcion shifted over 3 meters. In addition to the devastation of buildings and infrastructure, the earthquake caused massive damage to nature, displacing wildlife and destroying ecosystems along the coast. The 2010 Chile earthquake had a lasting impact on the country and the world. It was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded, and its effects were felt far beyond Chile's borders. The disaster highlighted the importance of preparedness in earthquake-prone regions, and Chile's response to the earthquake demonstrated the resilience of its people. Although the recovery process was long and difficult, the country eventually rebuilt much of what was lost, and lessons were learned that would help improve future responses to similar disasters. In the years since the earthquake, Chile has continued to strengthen its infrastructure and emergency systems, ensuring that it is better prepared for the next major seismic event. The 2010 earthquake served as a reminder of the country's vulnerability to natural disasters, but also its capacity for recovery. For the families who lost loved ones, the earthquake remains a tragic memory, while for others it stands as a testament to the strength and unity that emerged in the face of one of the most powerful earthquakes in modern history. Typhoon Nina, also known locally as Typhoon Bibeng, remains one of the most devastating storms in the history of Asia. This catastrophic event took place in early August of 1975 and became notorious not just for its strength, but for the extraordinary loss of life and destruction it caused. Before it made landfall, Typhoon Nina had already gained a reputation as a fierce and unpredictable tropical cyclone in the western Pacific Ocean, showing signs early on that it could become a catastrophic storm. The storm first began as a tropical disturbance off the coast of Guam. Warm sea surface temperatures and favorable atmospheric conditions quickly allowed the system to strengthen, and by the first few days of August, it had developed into a tropical storm. As it moved westward, heading toward the Philippines, Typhoon Nina continued to grow in size and intensity. Meteorologists tracked its progress closely, issuing early warnings to the regions in its path. Despite these warnings, the sheer power of the storm was beyond what most could imagine at the time. By the time Nina reached typhoon status, its wind speeds had accelerated dramatically. Reports later estimated that the winds at the center of the storm exceeded 120 miles per hour. As it barreled closer to the archipelago, the people of the Philippines braced for impact. The storm was moving fast, its wide wind field sweeping across the sea, pushing massive storm surges toward the coastal areas. On August 6, 1975, Typhoon Nina made landfall on Luzon, the largest and most populous island in the Philippines. It slammed into the northern regions with incredible force, bringing torrential rains, powerful gusts, and life-threatening storm surges that overwhelmed entire communities. The rains were so heavy that they caused massive flooding within hours of the storm's arrival. Coastal villages were some of the first to feel the brunt of the storm, with homes, businesses, and crops being swept away by the winds and water. But what made Typhoon Nina especially catastrophic was not just the immediate damage. As it moved inland, it triggered a series of events that would turn this typhoon into one of the most tragic natural disasters in the nation's history. After wreaking havoc in the Philippines, Typhoon Nina continued on its deadly path, leaving widespread devastation in its wake. But the storm was far from over, and its next target was even more populous. After crossing the island of Luzon, Nina weakened slightly as it moved into the South China Sea. However, the warm waters there allowed the storm to quickly regain strength, setting its sights on the southeastern coast of China. What started as a disaster for the Philippines was about to become an international catastrophe impacting millions across Asia. As the storm gained momentum, the people of China were ill-prepared for the scale of destruction that was about to strike. By early August, weather agencies in China had issued warnings for the coastal provinces, urging citizens to brace for severe flooding and landslides. Despite these warnings, the country's infrastructure, especially in rural areas, was not equipped to handle the sheer power of the approaching typhoon. On August 8, Typhoon Nina made landfall in mainland China, striking the Fujian province with full force. The winds, exceeding 120 miles per hour, tore through cities and villages alike. Entire towns were submerged as torrential rains flooded rivers, causing them to overflow and swallow everything in their path. Farmlands were destroyed, homes were flattened, and roads became impassable due to mudslides and debris. What made Nina particularly deadly in China was the failure of several dams, including the infamous collapse of the Banqiao Dam, which led to one of the deadliest dam failures in history. The Banqiao Dam, located in the Henan province, had been built to withstand massive floods, but it was no match for the intensity of Typhoon Nina. As the storm dumped massive amounts of rain over the region, water levels in the dam rose uncontrollably. On the night of August 8, the dam burst, releasing a wave of water that wiped out entire villages downstream. The resulting flood created a cascade of destruction, taking the lives of tens of thousands of people and leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. The failure of the dam was a turning point in the disaster as the floodwaters swept through the countryside, causing widespread chaos and loss of life. But the devastation didn't stop in China. Typhoon Nina's immense power affected other countries in the region as well. Taiwan, which was in the storm's direct path as it moved northward, faced heavy rains and strong winds that caused significant damage to infrastructure and agriculture. Vietnam and Laos also experienced residual effects from the typhoon, with torrential rains flooding rural areas and leaving communities stranded without food or clean water for days. In all, Typhoon Nina was a regional disaster affecting not only the Philippines, but also much of East and Southeast Asia. The scale of the destruction extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated, with the storm leaving a lasting legacy in every country it touched. As the winds died down and the rain began to taper off, the true extent of Typhoon Nina's devastation became evident. Survivors emerged from the wreckage to find their homes destroyed and their communities in ruins. In the Philippines, the recovery efforts began almost immediately, but the sheer scale of destruction made it an uphill battle. Government agencies, alongside international organizations, mobilized to provide assistance to those affected. However, the challenges were immense, with communication lines down and roads blocked by debris, hampering relief efforts. In the Philippines, the government declared a state of emergency in the hardest-hit areas. Rescue teams were dispatched to remote locations where entire villages had been swept away and many communities were cut off from aid. Local volunteers, often risking their own safety, joined the efforts to locate survivors trapped under the rubble or stranded in isolated areas. Relief centers were set up to provide food, water, and medical assistance, but the resources quickly became strained as more people sought help. The United Nations stepped in, coordinating an international relief effort that brought supplies and aid workers from around the globe. Countries such as Japan, the United States, and Australia sent planes filled with food, medical supplies, and equipment to aid in the recovery. Non-governmental organizations also played a critical role, setting up shelters and providing essential services to those displaced by the storm. As the focus shifted to recovery in the Philippines, the situation in China became a pressing concern. With the Banqiao Dam disaster, the Chinese government faced an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. The immediate priority was to search for survivors and provide medical care to the injured. Rescue teams were deployed to the hardest-hit areas, where entire neighborhoods were submerged. Reports indicated that local hospitals were overwhelmed, struggling to care for the thousands injured in the disaster. In the wake of Typhoon Nina, the Chinese government launched a comprehensive recovery and rebuilding plan. Emergency funds were allocated to help communities recover and rebuild infrastructure. Schools, hospitals, and homes were prioritized for reconstruction, but the task was daunting. The government also faced scrutiny over the failure of the dam, prompting investigations into the quality of construction and maintenance practices that led to such a catastrophic failure. In Taiwan, Vietnam, and Laos, recovery efforts were underway as well. Local governments worked to restore power and clean up debris, but the damage to agriculture was significant, with crops destroyed and livelihoods lost. Farmers faced an uncertain future, and many communities struggled to access clean water and food supplies. In response to the regional crisis, neighboring countries also offered assistance, sharing resources and expertise to aid recovery efforts across borders. The disaster brought attention to the broader issue of climate resilience in the region. Experts and government officials began to discuss the need for better disaster preparedness, improved infrastructure, and more robust emergency response systems to mitigate the impacts of future storms. Typhoon Nina served as a harsh reminder of the vulnerability of coastal and riverine communities to the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, prompting calls for action at both local and international levels. As the weeks turned into months, the survivors of Typhoon Nina slowly began to rebuild their lives amidst the wreckage, united by their shared experience of loss and resilience. The typhoon left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of those who lived through it, reminding them of the power of nature and the strength of community in the face of adversity. As the dust began to settle from the immediate chaos following Typhoon Nina, the region started to reflect on the lessons learned from this devastating storm. In the Philippines, discussions emerged regarding the need for stronger building codes and infrastructure improvements to withstand future typhoons. The government began collaborating with international engineering firms and disaster management organizations to assess existing structures and develop a comprehensive plan to reinforce vulnerable areas. Education on disaster preparedness became a priority as communities recognized the importance of being equipped with the knowledge and tools to respond effectively to future emergencies. Schools incorporated disaster response training into their curricula, teaching children and their families how to prepare for severe weather events, identify safe shelters, and create emergency plans. Community workshops were organized, where local leaders shared insights on resilience and recovery, fostering a culture of preparedness. In China, the Banqiao Dam disaster prompted a nationwide reevaluation of dam safety and flood management systems. The government initiated rigorous inspections of all major dams, implementing stricter regulations and maintenance schedules to prevent similar catastrophes. Public discussions around environmental sustainability gained momentum as citizens and officials alike began to understand the need for responsible management of natural resources and the impact of urban development on flood risks. The experience of Typhoon Nina also highlighted the interconnectedness of countries in the region when facing natural disasters. Regional cooperation became a focal point, with leaders from the Philippines, China, Taiwan, and other affected nations meeting to discuss joint initiatives for disaster response and recovery. They explored the establishment of a regional disaster management framework that would facilitate information sharing, resource allocation, and collaborative training exercises. In the wake of the typhoon, the economy of the affected regions took a significant hit. Agriculture suffered tremendously, particularly in the Philippines, where rice and other staple crops were destroyed. Farmers struggled to recover, leading to food shortages and increased prices. Local governments, alongside international aid organizations, implemented programs to provide financial assistance and resources to farmers to help them rebuild their livelihoods. The importance of crop diversification and sustainable agricultural practices became apparent as communities sought to create more resilient farming systems, less vulnerable to extreme weather. The psychological toll of Typhoon Nina also became evident as time passed. Many survivors struggled with the trauma of loss and displacement, and mental health services became a crucial aspect of recovery efforts. Organizations trained mental health professionals to support affected individuals, providing counseling and therapy to help communities heal. The process of recovery was not just physical, but also emotional, as people learned to cope with the lasting impacts of the disaster. As the years went by, the lessons learned from Typhoon Nina shaped policy decisions and community initiatives across the region. The storm served as a wake-up call to governments, organizations, and individuals about the urgent need for disaster preparedness and resilience in the face of a changing climate. Communities became advocates for their own safety, demanding better infrastructure and more robust emergency response systems, fostering a sense of agency and empowerment. In retrospect, Typhoon Nina was a catalyst for change, driving a shift in how the region approached disaster risk management. It underscored the significance of preparedness, community engagement, and international cooperation in building a more resilient future. The memories of the storm remained vivid, a poignant reminder of nature's power and the enduring strength of those who faced its wrath. As the years passed since Typhoon Nina, communities across the affected regions continued to rebuild and reflect on the profound impact of that catastrophic event. The scars left by the typhoon remained etched in the landscape and in the hearts of those who experienced its fury, serving as a constant reminder of the vulnerability faced by populations in disaster-prone areas. Yet, amidst the memories of loss and devastation, stories of resilience and recovery emerged, illustrating the indomitable spirit of those who weathered the storm. In the Philippines, the experience of Typhoon Nina ignited a sense of unity among communities. Neighborhoods that had once been fragmented began to work together, sharing resources, knowledge, and support in ways that had not been seen before. Local organizations, strengthened by the shared experience of loss, formed networks to assist those still struggling to regain stability. Community leaders organized regular meetings to discuss ongoing challenges, ensuring that everyone had a voice in shaping their recovery and future preparedness plans. The government's commitment to improving infrastructure gained momentum, with investments made in roads, bridges, and evacuation centers designed to withstand future storms. Communities began to embrace innovative technologies such as early warning systems and mobile apps to receive real-time updates on severe weather. This integration of technology into disaster management significantly enhanced the region's ability to respond swiftly to warnings and minimize potential loss of life and property. In China, the lessons learned from the Banqiao Dam disaster prompted a national discourse on sustainable development. The emphasis on responsible urban planning and environmental conservation became central to discussions around infrastructure projects. Citizens began to advocate for policies that prioritized the environment, recognizing the delicate balance between development and nature. The government responded with initiatives aimed at restoring natural ecosystems and investing in green infrastructure to mitigate the impacts of future flooding. Throughout the region, the bonds forged in the aftermath of Typhoon Nina contributed to a greater understanding of the importance of international cooperation in disaster management. Countries across Asia began to share knowledge, resources, and best practices, forming partnerships that transcended borders. Joint training exercises and simulation drills were organized to prepare for future natural disasters, fostering a sense of solidarity and shared responsibility among nations. As communities rebuilt, there was a renewed focus on mental health support. Survivors who had endured trauma received the necessary resources to process their experiences and find healing. Mental health professionals worked tirelessly to ensure that individuals felt supported and understood, facilitating community workshops that emphasized the importance of emotional well-being. The collective healing process became a testament to the strength of community bonds as people learned to lean on one another for support. In schools, children who had lived through Typhoon Nina were empowered to become advocates for disaster preparedness. Educational programs incorporated lessons about climate change, environmental stewardship, and safety protocols, ensuring that the next generation would be better equipped to face the challenges posed by natural disasters. Young voices emerge as powerful agents of change, driving conversations about sustainability and resilience within their communities. As Typhoon Nina faded into the past, its legacy continued to shape policies, practices, and mindsets across the region. The storm had been a devastating event, but it also served as a catalyst for transformation. prompting societies to confront their vulnerabilities and take proactive steps toward building a safer, more resilient future. In reflection, Typhoon, Nina taught invaluable lessons about the power of community, the importance of preparedness, and the need for collective action in the face of adversity. As people moved forward, they carried with them the memories of those who had been lost, honoring their stories by creating a future that prioritized safety, resilience, and unity. The echoes of Typhoon. Nina would forever resonate in the hearts of those who lived through it, reminding them that even in the face of nature's fury, hope and strength could rise anew. The tri-state tornado outbreak of 1925 was one of the most devastating natural disasters in United States history. It took place on March 18, 1925, and is remembered as the deadliest tornado outbreak ever recorded. This event spanned multiple states in the Midwest and southern United States, including Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. The tornadoes that formed during this outbreak caused unimaginable destruction, taking the lives of over 750 people and injuring more than 2,200 others. On that fateful day, at least 12 major tornadoes were confirmed across the region. The most infamous of these was the tri-state tornado, which carved a path of destruction that was 219 miles long, making it the longest tornado track ever recorded. This deadly tornado ripped through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, leaving behind unimaginable devastation. It was the deadliest tornado in the history of the United States and the second deadliest tornado in world history. The tri-state tornado outbreak left entire towns flattened, lives shattered, and communities reeling from the massive destruction. With no modern warning systems in place at the time, many were caught completely off guard by the powerful storms. This tornado outbreak stands as a reminder of the terrifying power of nature and the severe impact it can have on people's lives. It also became a defining moment in meteorological history, as researchers would later look back to better understand the factors that led to such a catastrophic event. In the years since, meteorologists have studied the outbreak to try and piece together how such a deadly series of tornadoes formed and why it caused so much devastation. Though this tornado event occurred almost 100 years ago, its memory still lingers in the regions affected and serves as a stark reminder of the force and unpredictability of nature. The conditions leading up to the tri-state tornado outbreak of 1925 were ideal for the formation of violent storms. During the early part of March, an unusually warm and moist air mass moved up from the Gulf of Mexico, colliding with a cold, dry air mass from Canada. This clash of air masses created an unstable atmosphere over the Midwest and southern United States. On March 18, 1925, these ingredients came together to form an intense low-pressure system that would spawn a series of deadly tornadoes. The first signs of trouble appeared in the early afternoon when thunderstorms began developing over southeastern Missouri. The atmosphere was so unstable that these storms quickly turned severe. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the first tornadoes had touched down near the town of Ellington, Missouri. Within minutes, the storm strengthened, and what would become the deadliest tornado in U.S. history began its nearly 3.5-hour journey across 3 states. The tornado first tore through Missouri, destroying farms, homes, and small towns in its path. By the time it crossed the Mississippi River into Illinois, it had already killed hundreds of people and leveled several communities. The powerful winds of the tornado ripped buildings off their foundations, uprooted trees, and tossed debris for miles. In some places, the damage was so severe that entire towns were unrecognizable. As the day wore on, the tornado continued its relentless march across southern Illinois and into Indiana. With each passing minute, the death toll climbed higher, and the destruction grew more widespread. People had little to no warning before the tornado hit, as there were no modern forecasting systems like radar or storm sirens. In many cases, residents didn't realize they were in danger until the tornado was already upon them. The lack of warning and the sheer size of the tornado contributed to the massive loss of life and property. By the end of the day, the tri-state tornado had left a path of destruction over 200 miles long, with winds estimated to be over 300 miles per hour at its peak. The storm had also triggered several other smaller tornadoes across the region, adding to the overall devastation. The tri-state tornado's impact on the cities it passed through was catastrophic. In Illinois, the town of Murfreesboro was hit especially hard. With a population of about 12,000 at the time, The tornado destroyed nearly everything in its path. The storm struck at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, leveling schools, homes, and businesses. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble, and over 200 people lost their lives in Murfreesboro alone, making it the single deadliest town affected by the tornado. The damage left behind was so extreme that it took months for rescue crews to fully sift through the debris and begin rebuilding. West Frankfort, another town in Illinois, was also devastated by the tornado. Here, many coal miners who had just returned from their shifts were caught by surprise as the tornado ripped through their community. The storm left behind a staggering death toll of over 150 people in West Frankfort, and entire neighborhoods were wiped off the map. Survivors recalled the terrifying roar of the storm and the chaos that followed as those who escaped with their lives tried to locate their families and neighbors amid the destruction. In Indiana, the town of Griffin was also in the tornado's path, suffering significant damage. Though the population was much smaller than the Illinois towns, the storm still managed to take lives and destroy countless homes. The aftermath left survivors struggling to find shelter, food, and medical help in the midst of overwhelming devastation. Aside from the towns themselves, the tornado caused widespread damage to farmland, transportation infrastructure, and utilities. Crops were flattened, livestock killed, and miles of railroad tracks torn up. Telephone and telegraph lines were downed, cutting off communication with the outside world. Roads became impassable due to debris, leaving many isolated for days until rescue crews could reach them. The immediate aftermath of the tornado was marked by confusion, chaos, and fear. Communities banded together to search for survivors and to care for the injured, but the scale of the disaster made recovery slow and difficult. The aftermath of the tri-state tornado left entire regions in shock. With thousands of homes destroyed and over 600 lives lost, the survivors faced an overwhelming task of rebuilding. Many were left homeless with few possessions and had to rely on makeshift shelters in churches, schools, and other buildings that remained standing. Emergency response was slow, as communication lines were cut and roads were blocked by debris, further complicating rescue efforts. Hospitals and clinics in the affected areas were quickly overwhelmed with the number of injured people. Local doctors, nurses, and volunteers worked tirelessly to treat wounds, but supplies ran low within days. In some cases, makeshift hospitals were set up to handle the influx of patients. Medical teams from nearby cities eventually arrived, bringing much-needed assistance and resources to treat the injured and provide care for those affected. Relief efforts were further hindered by the damage to infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and railroads were destroyed, making it difficult for supplies and rescue teams to reach the worst-hit areas. It took several days before aid could arrive from surrounding states, and even longer for organized relief efforts to be put into place. The American Red Cross and other organizations mobilized, sending volunteers, food, clothing, and medical supplies to help the thousands of displaced families. Rebuilding communities took years. For many survivors, the psychological toll was as significant as the physical destruction. Families who lost loved ones struggled to cope with the grief and trauma of the event. Entire towns had to be reconstructed, and it took immense effort from both local residents and outside aid to restore some sense of normalcy. In many cases, entire neighborhoods were unrecognizable, and the process of rebuilding homes and businesses was slow and laborious. The tri-state tornado's destruction also led to changes in disaster response and preparedness. Local governments began to reevaluate their emergency response plans, emphasizing the need for better communication systems and quicker access to medical and relief supplies. While the tornado's path of destruction could not have been predicted, the disaster prompted discussions about how to be better prepared for future natural disasters. The legacy of the tri-state tornado remains deeply etched in the history of the Midwest. The disaster, which struck on March 18, 1925, reshaped the lives of thousands and left a lasting impact on the communities affected. The sheer scale of the devastation, along with the unprecedented number of casualties, made the tornado a pivotal event in the region's history. In the years that followed, the tri-state tornado became a significant case study for meteorologists and emergency responders. Efforts to understand the factors that led to such a powerful and long-lasting tornado spurred advancements in meteorology. While the technology of the time could not predict tornadoes, the devastation underscored the need for better forecasting methods and storm warning systems. In the decades that followed, scientists and meteorologists worked toward developing systems that could give people more time to prepare and seek shelter. Beyond the scientific advancements, the disaster also fostered a sense of resilience and community among the survivors. Towns that had been leveled by the storm gradually rebuilt, and the stories of survival, bravery, and solidarity became part of the local lore. Despite the overwhelming destruction, people came together to rebuild homes, schools, businesses, and their lives. The experience also highlighted the importance of neighborly support and the collective spirit of recovery as communities leaned on each other to move forward. Today, the tri-state tornado is remembered not just for the destruction it caused, but also for the lessons it provided in preparedness, response, and recovery. Monuments and memorials stand in several of the affected towns, honoring the lives lost and reminding future generations of the storm's profound impact. The disaster also serves as a sobering reminder of the power of nature and the importance of continued advancements in weather forecasting and disaster management. The tri-state tornado remains one of the deadliest and most destructive tornadoes in American history. Its aftermath led to improved systems for emergency response and laid the groundwork for modern tornado warnings, leaving a lasting mark not only on those who experienced it firsthand, but on the entire field of disaster preparedness.